Now we've talked about the gene. And hold on, I forgot to do this part. We've talked about the gene, and the gene we know now is made of DNA, and it creates a protein of some sort. But a gene was originally a ribozyme. So, and then we could go even before that. Before it was a ribozyme, it might have been something called a proto RNA. Regardless of where all of this information came from originally, at its core, a gene is simply information. And that information, by the very nature of its three-dimensional design, just duplicates itself. And so, the selfish gene simply states that ever since that original self-replicating molecule existed, by its very nature, it existed with imperfect replication that led to adaptation. So adaptations have accumulated and accumulated and accumulated due to the imperfect way that the molecule replicates. Like if we were to look at those 3D printers, you remember they didn't replicate perfectly, so they made new versions. Same thing. So there was the original RNA molecule 1, and it replicated. But then there were imperfections. And then a lot of the time, those imperfections were bad, and so they would just die. But sometimes those imperfections were good, so we'll go another round. And sometimes a good imperfection came around, and that is an adaptation. And so that helps it to replicate. And so over time, these self-replicating molecules improved their information. Their information got better and better and better. And they started building things around them. First, it was most likely a lipid bilayer, like I said before. And then proteins started to get into the mix. And then before you knew it, many, many generations later, we have you. And so these adaptations, these add-ons to the original information gene, they're all just for the purpose of that replication still. So almost everything that you can think of that a person does, an animal does, is centered, at least today or in the past, around fitness of that organism and fitness of that genetic material, the propagation of that genetic material. You can think of it like, we have our genes, and those genes have to get to the next generation in order to stay immortal. And you are a vehicle for those genes. You are a vehicle that eventually expires, but the genes persist in your offspring. And so it is the genes' way of staying immortal. The genes that exist in you today exist for one reason, and that is because they are selfish. In the past, selfish behaviors have led to your increased fitness. So let's say, for example, there's two guys, or two cavemen, right? One of them is a nice guy, he's very faithful to his wife, and then the other guy is a cheater. He cheats on his wife, right? So this guy has two wonderful babies with his loving wife. This guy cheats, so he has his two babies with one wife, but then he has two more by a couple mistresses. So then a lion comes along, and a lion decides it's hungry, and it eats two children, or let's say it's a lion pride. It eats two children of both families. So this guy's unselfish DNA is gone. His genetic line is over, but his genetic line continues. And so the selfish gene In this instance, by no desire of its own, just by nature reinforcing, nature selected for the genes. There's some sort of trait on here. There's some gene on here that codes for selfishness that help to preserve this particular individual's genetic line. And so that is where selfish behaviors come from. But sometimes selfish behaviors are in disguise. Sometimes we don't see them as selfish. So for example, kindness can actually be a selfish gene behavior. Because let's go back to the scenario with the two men. We'll say this guy is nice and this guy is mean. And so this guy, the nice guy, gives his food to somebody and helps to feed them. And then the mean guy does not. So they have two kids. They have two kids each. So then famine comes in. Famine would kill two children each. However, the nice guy, his neighbor, returns the favor, and his two children live. So his genetic line is preserved. So even though it is a nice behavior, it is kind, isn't that sweet? It is still serving the gene. So that is still, even though it is kindness, it is still helping the gene, and is still the selfish gene's strategy for propagation. And so that is one way we explain kindness as a selfish gene. So no, to answer the question at the beginning of the lecture, just because we are designed around a selfish gene does not mean that we ourselves have to be selfish. In fact, being kind and unselfish is an investment that can come back to you. All right, so art. A lot of people like to say that art is what sets us aside from the rest of nature. But really, when you are artistic, that can be attractive to a certain mate. And so really, art is a way of manifesting your intelligence. When you put something on a page, you are showing the dexterity of your hand. You are showing the precision of your eye. You are showing the creativity of your mind and how well it works. So when you are an artist, that is going to make you more attractive. And so that is another source of selfishness. It also can just help you find a mate that is suitable to you. So maybe you're like me and you have a big nose, right? And maybe this big nose of yours does not help you today. So how do we describe things that make no sense in today's context? Like, for example, how do we describe a woman who gives away her kidneys? There are people out there that give away their kidneys to random strangers because doing kind things makes them feel great. So let me tell you why. It's because we have to look at the past and we have to compare it to now. In the past, we used to live in small groups around campfires. And we would travel as small groups. And so, like I said before, kindness makes a big difference when you're in small groups. Because if you help somebody, they can return the favor to you later. And so that's called reciprocation. And so it's really important to be kind to people if there's only a few people, right? You need to be able to count on your allies. So we evolved at a time where this existed. And then we suddenly stopped evolving. The reason why is we overcame nature. We overcame selective pressures more than any other animal, really. I mean, we still have them, but we overcome most of them. And so we are still set up for the past. We are still designed for the past. We are not designed for the current way humans live. Currently, we live in vast cities, and there are millions of people all around us. but we still have old genes, the old gene that persisted and survived. Those old genes are still in us, and they're still firing off selfishly, telling us that we need to be kind as a strategy for their survival. And so we are unnecessarily kind in a way that doesn't really help us in many situations, because we are still thinking, our genes are still thinking about the past. Our genes are still set up for that time. And that explains a lot of behaviors that don't appear to be selfish now,